Welcome viewers to the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. That is I, where no God is required for a life of love, joy, peace, fulfillment, meaning, and purpose in life. And the good life is one guided by reason and motivated by love. A special day here on my show. We're going to do another interview. I have with me here today Mr. Nick Lee. Welcome to my show. Thank you for coming, Nick.
Thank you.
Before we get into the interview, I want to give Nick's very impressive bio.
Thank you.
So Nick is an activist for atheism and humanism, and we're going to kind of turn Nick loose today. First, let me go over your bio. So correct me if I'm wrong, Nick. And this is very impressive. Nick is a retired federal employee throughout the U.S. and two foreign countries. He's moved to Texas in 2003, became the president of Freethinkers Association of Central Texas, formed the nonprofit Texas Free Thought Convention. He's helped put on citywide celebrations of the First Amendment as a counter to the National Day of Prayer, which just occurred not long ago. He was elevated president of the Atheist Alliance Convention, and he was a Texas state chair for the Secular Coalition for America. And I've got written down in my notes here, Nick, a true activist. And I get fired up when I talk to other fellow atheists that are activists, trying to make changes, trying to do good, trying to take our atheism into humanism and make progressive, positive changes in the world. So, Nick, let's go ahead and discuss your upbringing briefly. Then we're going to get into some other topics I want to turn you loose on. So tell my viewers a little bit about your upbringing and your background as far as religion goes and so forth.
I was raised in Oregon, and Oregon is a pretty secular state generally. And my folks, although coming from a religious background themselves, had drifted away from it. And so I would just call them deists. They thought maybe there was something up there, but they weren't terribly enthused about it. So as a result, there was no great move for religion in the home. I did get exposure to various churches when neighborhood kids would invite me to their Sunday school. And I would go to one and listen to that. The next week I'd go to a different church and I'd listen to a different set of rules and regulations, and I'd think to myself, that's interesting. They're all Christians. And it kind of made me an objective observer, so I could stand back and view it objectively and really not get embroiled in it.
Good. Interesting that so many of us as activists for atheism or humanism, we come from so many various backgrounds.
Yes.
Some like you were more and more in a secular environment, maybe where there was a little more education, critical thinking. And some of us were more from that fundamentalist background where it was anti-science and it was straight Bible. Yeah. I really want you to elaborate on the National Day of Prayer. And I failed to bring my phone in here. Sorry, folks, I was going to read a paragraph from the Task Force, a Christian website concerning the National Day of Prayer, but I'll kind of paraphrase, I remember it. So the Task Force for the National Day of Prayer is a Christian movement wanting to actually push the belief that we as a Christian country were founded upon Christian principles, and we were birthed as a nation by the Christian God or through prayer through the Christian God, to the Christian God. So you have been involved in this for quite some time. So let's talk about the National Day of Prayer and what are your thoughts about that and so forth?
Well, it's pretty well established that the whole National Day of Prayer, that is a commandment by the government that we're all going to kneel and pray on that day, is contrary to the Constitution and has many problems with it. Part of the problem is that it is government sponsored, that in most communities and in most states, It's the governor or the mayor who makes a proclamation and says, I welcome all of the people in this community to get together and pray, and they themselves get involved in it, which it gives the aura that they have sanctioned Christianity particularly, not just religion in general. And for the most of them, it is in fact a particularly, specifically evangelical Christian event. They'll say, well, we had a rabbi there, but it's pretty rare that any rabbi gets to speak, or anyone from any of the moderate mainstream Christian religions, the Methodists and the Presbyterians and so on, who aren't terribly enthused by this either. They have their National Day of Prayer in their own churches, which is as it ought to be. Our objection is only that it gets held on City Hall steps or on the steps of the state capitol and gets an official proclamation. So when this was held in this, you must remember, this only came up in the mid-50s, about the time of the McCarthy hearings and the Un-American Activities Committee, that it was a reaction against those godless communists. In order to prove that you were not a communist, you had to say, I believe in God. And the phrase, "In God we trust," adding "under God" to the prayer, to the flag,
Yeah. The pledge,
and the National Day of Prayer, all came up about that same time. So it's not something steeped in our history. It was driven by a particular social set of events there. So it doesn't have a whole lot of credibility or validity in the United States. And we're concerned because it has the aura of being respectable. So in San Antonio, as I was on the board of the local chapter of Americans United for the Separation of State down there, and as president of the Freethinkers Association of Central Texas, we combined our forces and began to plan this celebration of the First Amendment, and to time it with the first National Day of Prayer. And we held a contrary event. We had a Baptist minister, we had a Lutheran minister, we had a newspaper columnist, we had a pretty broad range of panelists up there saying why the separation of church and state was important to them, and why we must maintain that. Meanwhile, the folks downtown on the city steps were chanting on and going, praise God and God bless America. And they were getting lots of press for that, and our event did not. But we carried it on for a couple of years in order to try to draw the attention away and to make it known to the community that there is an alternative, that there is some objection to this, that it's not really a National Day of Prayer, an official thing that all citizens are compelled to get down on their knees for.
Would you say that one of the main objectives for this task force, National Day of Prayer, would be evangelism?
Yes, very, very definitely. All the people involved in it, and it came out of Dobson's ministry, national ministry. In fact, Shirley Dobson, his wife, is the one that I think still runs that, and so they have a non-governmental organization that helps local communities put it on. And in San Antonio, there is an evangelistic church minister who puts it on. Soapy Dollar is his name. And they do it in San Antonio. So throughout the nation, it really is aimed to satisfy evangelical Christians and to reassure them that they have dominance in this society. And that's thereby is our objection.
Good. You were discussing the First Amendment. I'd like you to go over that. I know this is very rudimentary and simple, but when people I run into, Christians and even some fellow atheists, especially fellow freethinkers that have just recently come out of religion, some of them really don't understand. And you were talking about the coin, "In God We Trust," and the Pledge of Allegiance. Mm-hmm. I had a neighbor not long ago who was a professed agnostic. But we were talking about how a lot of the Christians that I talk to say that we're a Christian nation because it says, "In God We Trust," and so forth. And he even brought that out. And I had to explain to him, in the 1950s how that was placed. It wasn't on the original currency or the pledge. There is a lot of ignorance out there, especially among believers, because they've been told, of course, that this is a Christian country and our forefathers were these Bible-believing, Jesus-loving and Christians. So the First Amendment, I think most people know that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So would you care to expound on that? And let's talk
Sure.
about
The background of it came from the original 13 colonies. Each one of them had an established religion. And they were differing religions, Congregationalist and so on. When, after the Revolutionary War, they agreed to come together, they made an Articles of Confederation, a confederation which is different from our current. And it was a very weak national government because there were many things they could not agree on. And one of the things they could not agree on was, what religion will we be? And so in this weakness of this government, each colony or each state then continued with their established religion. When, after a few years, by 1789, they realized the Articles of Confederation were too weak, left the country open, defenseless. We needed to improve and the power of the federal sector, and so they got together in the Constitutional Convention. Now, the only way you could work out a compromise between all of these established religions was to say, we won't have any established religion in this country. That you can be whatever you want to be, but the state will not dictate a particular religion to you. And therein lies the First Amendment. Now, mind you, when the Constitution was finished, there were still things they needed to iron out. And they insisted on some amendments to it. And what impresses me is the very first amendment, and the very first clause in that amendment was the freedom of religion. So that that indicates how important that was to them to insert that, so that that every religion could be assured that the federal government was not going to be some kind of overlord, as they had been accustomed to in Europe, where the church and the government were hand in glove, and you could not vary from that without insulting. You couldn't vary from the religion without insulting the king. You couldn't insult the king without running afoul of the church. So they agreed to that. And so the very first amendment is that Congress shall make no law affecting the establishment of nor the free exercise of religion. That means from the federal standpoint, they're out of the religion business. And later on in Article 6 of the Constitution, they say there will be no religious test for office. That's how it came to be. And if you understand that progression, why it was important to us, then you know that this cannot be a Christian nation. That they decided from early on that it wasn't going to work to limit it to just a Christian nation. We've had influx of varied religious groups coming in. Remember, when we said when they say a Christian nation, they're thinking primarily of Protestant. But early in the 19th century, we began to get an influx of Catholics. Oh my God, those papists are trying to run the country, and there was a real back blow against those. But they were allowed to come because they had the freedom of religion, and they could worship Catholicism. And then, of course, the Jewish folks came in, and more recently, Muslim folks began to come in. Gaia bless us for having this great diversity of religions, and everyone can take their pick and be whatever they want or not. And it's been a hard struggle to recognize that and to get the religious right, particularly, to back off from their insistence that everybody follow their track.
Was it correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, was it the First Amendment or is it the Sixth, that the authority comes from the Constitution? That's the supreme law of the land. And so many Christians I've talked to seem to want to use the Bible, or if it's a Muslim, they want to use the Quran as the supreme law of the land versus the Constitution. Yep. Another thing that is so, I guess frustrating in some ways to me and many of us, is there are so many Christians that I have dialogue with literally believe that our Constitution mentions Christianity and religion. And you talk about the Treaty of Tripoli, you discuss the only mention of religion in the entire Constitution is Article 6, Clause 3, the no religious test clause.
Yeah.
Isn't that true?
That's true.
The only mention of religion in the entire Constitution is about there should be no religious test for any office required.
Yeah. And in the First Amendment, that's a mention of it. Many of the folks confuse the Constitution with the Declaration of Independence, in which the word the Creator appears. But again, if you read the people who drew up that Declaration of Independence, you understand that they're talking about a general concept
or a deist
of someone up there, without referring to Christianity or Judaism or Islam at all. So they didn't mean a particular God. They just had a general feeling that whoever created this country, were operating under their rules. And that was the Declaration of Independence, to show that the freedom of individuals under the Enlightenment came from natural causes, and not from the king, and not from the Pope.
Beautiful. And the Treaty of Tripoli, was it 1797? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, that the United States government in no way was founded upon the Christian religion. And there's so many people that I talk to and other atheists talk to that are Christians that are so unfamiliar and unaware, or I hate to say the word ignorant, but unlearned and unknowing of these simple concepts about the Constitution and so forth. So Nick, what can we do as a community of, whether you consider yourself an atheist, agnostic, skeptic, humanist, unbeliever, or the nuns, what would you say in all the things wonderful things you've done for the movement? How would you encourage fellow unbelievers and fellow atheists? How would you encourage us to get involved, and how important is it for atheists to stand up against this? And what would you say would be the things that we could do, and why should we do it?
I've been involved in, 3 statewide conventions and about 3 or 4 national or international conventions. And each time, when I made my opening statement, I said, this convention is not just for the weekend. And when you leave here on Sunday, I want you to go away inspired to get out in the community and do stuff and get active in the community. And when I was the co-chair for the Secular Coalition for America, that was the whole modus operandi for that, was that it was a political arm of the free thought movement, or of the atheist movement. Many other national atheist organizations are involved in monitoring the improper incursion of religion in our secular life, and they're filing lawsuits, or they're sending nasty letters to school districts or city councils or whatever. But what it takes is for everyone to get involved politically. And I maintain that everyone can do that, starting from writing letters to the editor in response to things they see in the newspaper, moving up to picking up the phone and calling their representative and saying, there's a bill in your state legislature, or their city councilman. You guys are discussing a certain policy, and I want you to bear in mind that there are some of us out here that disagree with that. If we don't make our presence known, they're not going to do anything about it, because they won't understand where we're coming from. They won't believe that there is an alternate worldview. Mind you, the religious right specifically, not just Christianity in general, the religious right specifically has been working for 40 years building this political coalition. And they began electing themselves to school boards, electing themselves to city councils, and working their way up to the legislatures and becoming a political force, because they move together, they vote together, and so on. Atheists and freethinkers and humanists are very famous for being like herding cats, trying to get them to work in unison. They're independent thinkers by nature. And so you can't really get them together in a political coalition. But that's something of what these national organizations and what the Secular Coalition of America is about, too, is to draw them in and become more politically active. While I was in that position here in Texas, I was constantly coming to Austin to testify in front of committees. Was I testifying about religious matters? Not exactly. It was social issues. It were social issues having to do like with women's rights. Mm-hmm. We're interested in women's rights because because most of the action to limit women's rights to health care and that sort of thing come from a religious base. That, well, the Bible says, women should shut up and sit down and not be heard, and they should bear as many babies as God wants them to have. So in effect, we're still fighting against the influence of religion, but we're doing it in the context of a social issue. There are many other social issues to be fought against, and again, if we don't do it, nobody will understand that it's wrong to introduce religious concepts into a secular government. And it is a secular government. It's because the government speaks for all of the Jews, all of the Muslims, all of the Catholics, all of the Protestants, all of the Methodists, all of the Presbyterians, and whatever. Mm-hmm. And in this process, I have in fact coordinated these actions with what I call the mainstream religions. Ministers from Lutheran ministers, Presbyterian ministers, Baptist ministers, who agree fully with a separation of church and state. This is not universal among all Christians. This is peculiar to this very extreme literalist religious right. There are a great many Christians and Christian leaders who are fully in bed with us in terms of keeping the government out of their church. They're as interested in that as we are in keeping religion out of our government. Remember, it was the Danbury Baptists who wrote the letter to Thomas Jefferson. Why did they write it? Because they were in Danbury, Connecticut, where the established church was, starts with a C, was not theirs.
I don't know either.
Yeah,
I'm drawing a blank.
I just said it a minute ago, but I've slipped from my mind.
It's okay.
At any rate, they did have an established they did have an established religion in Connecticut, and so the Danbury Baptists wanted reassurance that this new federal government was not going to enforce any religious strictures on them. And that's when Jefferson wrote back and said, I view this Constitution to have established a wall of separation between religion and the government.
Would you agree that the majority of, you're talking about the right-wing fundamentalist Christian movement,
Yes.
are slowly trying to chip away at that wall, and they want a theocracy, a Christian theocracy?
Yeah, they have. I sense that they are losing their power, though. I am very optimistic that the secular point of view in terms of running a government is winning, both in terms of the mainstream religions and in terms of the increasing number of people who are not particularly religious. But yes, over the last 30 or 40 years, there was a very concerted effort on the part of these religious right literalist believers to say, we want to restructure this government to be strictly a Christian government and follow the precepts of the Bible only, and not the rules of this secular thing, this godless government that was set up.
Could you imagine how much trouble that would be for people like us?
Yes.
If this were a Christian country run by the Bible,
Well,
it would bring us and burn us at the stake.
of course, of course. And you know, we often joke that there was a time when the government was run by as a Christian organization, and we call that the Dark Ages.
Exactly. And we've grown out of that. A loving God didn't bring us out of that. It was the enlightenment of humanism.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And not only people, freethinkers and atheists have to worry about that. It's all of the other forms of Christianity, not to mention the other religions, Buddhism, Sikhism, whatever.
Hinduism, Islam, all of them.
Exactly. So everyone has a stake in this to keep this government secular, which doesn't mean anti-religion. It just means you do what you want within your church. You do what you want within your home. You pray before meals if you like, and students can pray in the classroom before they take a test. It just cannot be sponsored by the teacher. It just cannot be sponsored by the government.
Yeah, I think I remember back, it must have been maybe, I was born in the 50s, so I think it was in the 70s, and maybe early 80s. My father was the pastor, and that's when my brother and I began to preach, and we began to do that too. But I do remember a major convention with an evangelist named James Robison. Do you remember James Robison?
Yep.
Jerry Falwell, all those. And they were at the convention center in Waco, and I was a young preacher, and my father and I, my brother went, and we met other ministers. But I remember James Robertson vividly, and I wondered to myself, I really didn't get into politics too much back then as a young 20-something-year-old evangelist. It was just straight Bible and Jesus, you know.
Yep.
But I remember he was talking almost more about politics than just the Bible. And he kept bringing up how we need to vote God, we need to vote for Republicans who stand on the Word of God, the Bible. And I think now I look back, and that was maybe the start or the peak or pinnacle of that Christian right movement into politics. And it was around the 70s or 80s, is that correct?
It was close to that. It was probably maybe a little bit earlier than it was in the 70s, I guess. And there is, in fact, a common theme throughout there. There was a movement calling themselves dominionists, and a couple of writers were preparing whole texts on how to bring this about and why this should be a Christian nation and Christ should have dominion over the United States, and to do away with all of the other forms of worship and all the other secular things that were in there. And there were a couple of really vicious people involved in that. And every once in a while that pops up again. That is a long-term goal of theirs. There was. But as I say, I think that it really is it's ebbing. It's beginning to wear away now. There aren't as many avid people that claim to be dominionists anymore.
I think it is dying off. I think this younger generation, I mean, I'll be 59 in July, so, and I know you're a little older than I am. A few years, right?
Yeah.
I think this younger generation, I talk to fellow atheists that are maybe in their 20s and 30s, my kids' age, and they seem to be really coming out of religion and out of this control of Christianity and religion in their lives so much easier than those of us back in the day. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the internet and the information that this younger generation has. And I meet so many people here. I was just at a meetup group. Christine and I were at a meetup group in South Austin before we came here. And we met some wonderful people there, fellow atheists, and they were all just young. I mean, in their 20s and 30s. So it seems to be this dominionism, this conquering the world for Jesus attitude is slowly being eradicated or just slowly dying off, I think, with each generation.
Yes, it is. The people, if you poll people, depending on how you ask the question, there's still a large percentage who will say, yeah, I believe in God. But if you pin them down and say, what do you mean by that? And what does that do for your personal life? They begin to back off of some of these extreme statements that the radical right will say. And clearly, the church attendance records are diminishing. The churches are going out of business. The last time I checked, there was something like 150 churches for sale in Texas alone.
Wow.
If you want to buy a church, and they're closing their doors because of lack of interest. And at the same time, as the Pew poll shows, there's an increase in the number of people who don't ally themselves with religion. Not necessarily atheists, but that's good enough for us because they have, whatever their personal beliefs are, they're not out pushing a radical religious right agenda on the rest of the world. So I think that we're on the upswing of a secular, and that's the term I would rather use, is that secular simply means that it is without being driven by religious dogma, that we're driven by a more humanistic, what's good for people? What's the best for the most number of people?
Secularism, a conviction that the affairs of human beings be governed not by faith in the supernatural, but by reliance on evidence and reason from the natural world. Its secularism teaches us to be good here and now. Its secularism depends upon realities and demonstrations, and we try to make this world better every day. I had to memorize that from Freethinkers. Susan, is it Jacobs or Jacoby?
Yeah, Jacoby.
That book was one of the most wonderful books I've ever read years ago. And that definition or quote of secularism was so good to me. I had to memorize that.
Yeah.
And yeah, we are slowly moving more secular. And as I talk to Christians all the time, I tell them we are growing and you are slowly diminishing. But they really don't understand, at least some of them don't, the importance of that wall of separation of church and state, because it gives them the freedom to continue to believe what they want to believe. Just
Sure.
keep it, like you
That's
say,
right. That's
out
right.
of church. Out of government and out of other people's lives, out of public schools, and keep it where it should be, in their personal belief system, in their mind, in their local churches with
Yeah.
other people. So,
And as an activist, I have always maintained that it should not be our mission to eradicate religion in the world. It's not possible, despite what Richard Dawkins keeps saying. And it's counterproductive for us to make fun of other religions. What I want on a one-on-one conversation with a Christian or a Muslim or whatever is to say, we'll have non-overlapping magisteria. You believe what you want to believe, I'll believe what I want to believe. But when it comes to governing the nation or governing the state, let's agree we'll do what's best for all of the people, no matter what their religious. I don't feel I need to convert them all. Some atheists do, particularly the angry atheists are the ones who are angry because they were misled in their childhood. They've been lied to in their childhood, and they're so angry with that they just want to strike out and insult Christians. I don't need to insult them.
right. You come from a very secular background. Those of us like myself, my testimony would be different than yours. On my first episode of my channel here, a year ago, I talk about my deconversion story and how similar it is or analogous it is to several other atheists. But those of us that came out of hardcore, what I call deep end of the pool Christianity, those of us that were on the front lines of battle, preaching the gospel, traveling, winning souls for Jesus, starting churches, all the things I did as a young preacher. Those of us that came out of this, when we first do come out of Christianity, and I talk about this on my YouTube channel, episode 1, my deconversion.
Yeah.
I did go through about a year or two of that angry stage, that maybe a little nihilistic stage. And you feel like, oh, I've been cheated, I've been lied to, and this was 25 years ago. But most of us do mature out of that into humanism. We keep our strong atheism without belief in a God, but yet what do we do with that atheism? Are we bitter and angry at people? No. I like to use Peter Boghossian's quote, the criticism of an idea is not the same as a criticism of a person. We are not our ideas. We're independent of that.
Yeah.
We can be, but dignity to the human, but we can disagree. So yeah, as I talk to Christians, I do try to explain to them they don't need religion, but I do it in a respectful way. Not once, and when I do go talk to Christians, or even in churches when I go in there and have dialogue with people, I'm there to try to help them to see that there is an alternative, but there's a way to be kind to people, and that's where the humanism comes in. I'm not criticizing the person. I'm trying to be nice to the person, but though I don't agree with the religion. So that's the way my approach is. Instead of the angry atheist, I don't know what they're angry at, other than they must have just recently come out of atheism, like I did 25 years ago. So there could be that possible immature stage, or they haven't grown into, hey, it's just a complete myth, there's nothing to be angry at. I'm not mad at people. These people, most Christians I know are wonderful people. I've got friends that are Christians, but we just disagree. And yeah, I'm trying to help them to see they don't need it, and they're always trying to reconvert me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we may differ in our opinions on how to. My approach comes from being a former Christian preacher. My mannerisms, my speaking and all are still that way. That's how I am. Yours works. Your method works. I think mine does to a certain approach to different people. I think we're all just being ourselves. But I agree with you. We do have to be kind and nice and have respect to fellow human beings. That's what it's about. Love the human, but I do not have much respect for these Bronze Age myths, which does and do at times inflict upon our personal rights, our freedoms, and so forth. That's where I agree with you. We need to
and between atheists and on atheist blogs and in postings on Facebook, it's so easy to make fun of religion and to point out the two different origin stories that are in Genesis and all the contradictions that are in the Bible and all of that. And that's fun between us, but it's not productive when you're talking to a Christian, because they've grown up in this and they may not have really challenged themselves to read the entire Bible and all the evil chapters and verses there are in the Bible. If you could convince them to read the entire Bible, page 1 to page 957 or whatever, it might be useful. But, that's not my mission in life. I just want to agree with them, have them agree with me, that they can do what they want within their sphere of influence, but when it comes to the public sphere, we're going to be non-religious. We're going to be secular in raising our laws, our view, and our help. Now, most of secularism is very Christ-like in terms of its outreach to help the poor, to take care of the least of us. Mm-hmm. And so with that, they can't have any objection.
Right. And you said Christ-like, and I know what you meant, because that's what Christians usually say to me or others. For example, if we're out there, which we go to every Sunday morning, we go to feed these homeless people in Austin, and we're atheists. And a lot of the Christians I encounter and have dialogue with, they ask me, well, why would you do this? Why are you helping people if you're an atheist? And then some of them will say, well, you're doing this because you're copying Christianity, or you're hijacking and plagiarizing this from Jesus. And my response to them is, no, it's just simply, these are human virtues. These are innate within us as humans, as a social species, to care for each other. I mean, we have been taking care of each other as a gregarious species for much longer than Christianity or religion have been around. And
it goes even far beyond that. Bonobo chimps have been proven to have empathy for other members of the tribe. So, it seems to be a much deeper natural phenomenon for us to take care of each other.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine, a client of mine, who's a Christian. He said, oh, you're just a Christian atheist. I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, you're an atheist, but you act like a Christian because you try to help needy people. And I had to explain to this person that this is human to do these things. It's not exclusively Christian.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Hindus would do the same. Islam does the same.
Mahatma Gandhi. I mean,
yes, of course.
So it's universal. It's within us. So, well, we covered some good ground, Nick. Is there anything else you want to elaborate before we close it up today?
No, I don't think so. We've pretty much covered the universe.
Yeah,
I just want to again reiterate that I would hope that the viewers watching this would understand how secularism comes about and how it can be a cause, a force for good in terms of a compassionate government that helps all people, no matter what their religion is, without stepping on the toes of any religious observance.
Are there any books that you would encourage my viewers to read if they wanted to? And we try to encourage people to think for themselves, right? That's what we are. We're free thinkers. We form opinions based on reason, independently of authority or religion. Are there any books that you would encourage some of my dear Christian friends and viewers who are getting to that point and they're mixing faith with reason and they're on the fringe, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Any books you want to encourage them to read, like I did years ago? Freethinkers was an amazing one for me. But
there are a number of books out there, and maybe a good introduction would be Susan Jacoby's book, The Freethinkers. Incidentally, she has a new book out on Robert Ingersoll, which talks about, if they're not familiar with Robert Ingersoll, a 19th century politician who went around the country speaking to thousands of people before there was any magnification. He just had to shout loudly in Chautauqua tents and that kind of thing. In fact, there was a town in Texas. He was so popular that a town in Texas named themselves Ingersoll, Texas.
Is it Ingleside or Ingersoll?
Ingersoll. Ingersoll.
Okay. I know an Ingleside down close to Corpus Christi. It must be a different.
Then a few years later, the residents of the town kind of turned over to a Christian thing, and they renamed it. What was it? Redstone or something, Texas. It's down in the southeast part of Texas. They could also read. There was also read about the Freethinkers movement in Texas, the German immigrants who came and settled in the hill country, and they settled in places like Comfort, and established the town of Comfort, and for the first 40 years, 50 years of its existence, didn't have a single church. Not that they were anti-religion, they just didn't see any need for it, and so they had a flourishing community there for quite a while. Just learning American history, I think, would show them the variety of influences that have come to this government that have gotten us to this point, that they need to understand it's not just all based on that. I guess we said before, if we could get them to read their own Bible, they may uncover things that they have to challenge, and they'll have to ask embarrassing questions of their minister or pastor.
Or they can leave it up to me when I visit them in the church to ask them questions, because I like to do that. There's Sunday school classes.
Yeah.
So, well, good. I'm glad you brought up Robert Ingersoll. I just read a book recently from the library here, the ACA library, on the life of Robert Ingersoll. And I would say he's one of my heroes. Just reading about him, just fascinating, just kind of fires me up, to get out there and to talk. So, well, I believe that should probably wrap it up. So thank you very much again for coming on the show.
You're sure welcome.
Nick Lee, it's been a pleasure, and I hope you viewers have enjoyed our little debate today, our talk today, our interview. And just remember that no God is required for a life of love and joy and peace, fulfillment, meaning, and purpose in life. And the good life is one guided by reason and motivated by love. Have a wonderful day.